welcome to this week's episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, big thank you to everybody that that liked, commented, retweeted, shared, all that kind of stuff. Last week's episode of the show. I thought it was quite an interesting episode, and a couple of distilleries retweeted my tweets as well, which was really nice. So yeah, that was pretty cool. So anyway, on to today's episode of the show. Now, you're probably thinking, "Oh, look, he's reviewing some sherry monsters," and well, I am. And for those of you that have watched the show for eons and eons will know that this is not actually the first time I've reviewed Glendronach. This is actually the third. The first episode I did was in 2013. The second episode I think I did in 2017, which was back when I was buying directly from the distillery. But since Billy Walker sold the distillery, I don't actually deal directly with them now. But I found I had a number of the samples, and including a very, very rare independent bottling of Glendronach, and you just don't see it. I mean, in the whole of my time in the whisky industry, I have only ever encountered 3 independent bottlings. I mean, I'm sure there've probably been other ones, but it's certainly not a distillery that appears, shall we say, on the face of it, to sell Cask to the independent bottling companies, and certainly if they do, allow them to use the name. But anyway, now a lot of these samples are quite old, as in they come from around about sort of 2015-ish. I think a couple certainly come from the World Whisky Awards in 2015, and a couple of the other ones I think I tasted for the Whisky magazine again back at that sort of time. So they're probably not wholly indicative of the current releases, but hell, why not? Let's give them another crack. And unlike, say, for example, Glenfarclas, who don't use American oak at all, and therefore you never really get to see what the distillery character is. I mean, you can get a bit of it from the 10-year-old. So unlike them, Glendronach do fill into American oak casks, but again, you don't tend to get a wholly American oak aged bottling. Although I think they did a virgin oak finish 14-year-old some years ago, I think was American oak and then virgin oak, or it might have been wholly a virgin oak, I forget. But anyway, in the core range, when they introduced the Hielan, I think that's how you pronounce it, which was an 8-year-old, which we'll obviously kick off with. It's a vatting of both sherry cask and American oak. I mean, again, it's done to keep the price down, because obviously sherry casks are quite expensive, etc., etc. But what it allows us the opportunity to get a glimpse of what's the most sort of commonly used term for Glendronach spirit? Oh yeah, traditional. That's the one. Traditional, meaning meaty, sulphurous, and sometimes a little bit on the rough side, shall we say. And it's the sort of classic style of spirit that's produced at distilleries that tend to sort of like to use a whole load of sherry. At worst, it's basically a case of, well, we've got this really rough spirit, and we need to sort of hide it. Let's use mountains of sherry. But sometimes, I mean, yeah, I don't hate sherry monsters. I mean, I love old sherry monsters because of the obvious maturity angle, the sort of oxidation, and they become really intriguing. You get no distillery character, but they turn into sort of almost sort of Armagnacs, cognacs, that kind of thing. And I do love Armagnac and cognac. I love that kind of character. And I'm a retailer, so I have to understand that there are customers out there that love Glenfarclas, that love Glendronach, that love the big sherried whiskies. And there seem to be an inordinate amount of people that love Glendronach. And so, I have to stock it. I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot and, lose a sale because, it's not a whiskey that I'm maybe, the world's biggest fan of, and to be honest with you, you know, if I'm in the mood for a sherry monster, then, you know, I will probably go for, say, something like Glendronach or Glenallachie, for example, you know, because it has that sort of, that roughness. You know, I'm not a big fan of the sort of the Macallan and the Dalmore, the ultra polished sherry monsters. You know, if I'm going to have a sherry monster, then I want it a bit rough. I want it a bit dirty. Well, no, I don't want it dirty actually, because I don't like sulphurous. But you know, I like it a bit rough and ready. You know, certainly, although you know, Glendronach used an awful lot of Pedro Ximenez casks along with the Oloroso, you get, I think, quite a pleasant balance. Now, well, certainly, I would say that a go-to malt of this type is the original, the 12-year-old, which I don't have a sample of today. But you know, I've got some interesting samples here, so I think I'm going to stop waffling now and just introduce the lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off, like I said, with the Hielan. This is an 8-year-old, bottled at 46%, and as you can see, quite light in colour. So a combination of spirit that's been aged in American oak with a little bit of Oloroso. So, like I said, it should give us an indication of the style or the distillery's character, and then we can see whether you can pick out some character as you go kind of like further up the age statements. Next bottling we'll be looking at is the cask strength release that they do. This is batch number 4 from April 2015. It was bottled at 54.7%. And if you pop back to the episode of the show I did in 2017, you'll see that I did actually do a couple of later releases of the cask strength. But like I said, I've had this one knocking around for quite some time, so that time I used it, I suppose. Next bottling we'll be looking at is the Allardice. This is the 18-year-old. This particular bottling was bottled in 2014, and I originally tasted it way back in December of 2014. So again, usual combination of casks and bottled at 46%. Then we're going to look at quite an interesting bottling. This is an Abbey Whisky exclusive single cask. 20-year-old. It was distilled in September of 1994, bottled in November of 2014, and it's a single PX Puncheon 3400. Now, I don't really know anything about Abbey Whisky. I mean, they do seem to do a lot of exclusives and their own stuff. They seem to be very prolific on Twitter. But like I said, I don't have any direct dealings with them whatsoever, so I believe this was a sample that I tasted for the Whisky magazine. Then we're going to move on to the Parliament. That's the 21-year-old. Again, this particular sample comes from 2014, and it is bottled at 48%. And finally, like I said, one of the 3 independent bottlings that I've come across is a Malts of Scotland 24-year-old. It was a single sherry hoggy, 18011, distilled in 2014, bottled in 2018, and it was 24 years old and bottled at 50.2%. So again, this, as you can probably make out from the sticker on it, was from the 2018 Independent Bottlers Challenge, so relatively recent. So there you go. That's the lineup. Let's delve into some sherry then, shall we? Right. Okay. So let's see what the Hielan gives us then, shall we? Right. So yes, we are getting distillery character. It's got that slightly hard barley. It's not as industrial as, say, something like Glenfarclas, Dufftown, that kind of stuff, but there's an edginess to it. There's a, you know, but there's some honey, there's some herbal honey, there's a little granulated sugar, some oily fruit, some barley, and just in the background is a little bit of dried fruit sherry. It is, I think, in my personal opinion, really well balanced. this is just the sort of whiskey I like. It is giving me, you know, some indication of the character of the spirit, and a little bit of sherry just to add that nuance, just at the you know, just in the background. And this is the thing, you know, this is what I look for in a whiskey. I keep saying over and over again that balance to me is probably the most important factor of a whiskey, whether it's balance of character and cask or whatever. And so yeah, I like this. I think this is not a bad bottling at all, and it's not, there's no sulphur notes, there's no off notes. There's obviously the spirit, you know, is quite happy being bottled at 8 years of age. So anyway, let's see what it passes like. A pleasant progression. It kicks off quite crisp and quite citric to start off with, and then in moves the toffee, the slightly industrial barley, some rich fruit follows, and then finally the sherry dried fruits and a little bit of spice, a little bit of chocolate coming through right on the finish. And so, you know, it's still, I forget what it's retailing for, but it's still pretty well priced, and it gives you a little hit of sherry, you know, which is just really quite pleasant. It just works really well. And like I said, you know, you're getting the character of the spirit, and you're also getting a little bit of the character of the American oak, and you're getting a little bit of the sherry character. So all told, I think really well balanced bottle. Okay, so let's move on to the cask strength bottling. So this is 54.7. Right, so we're obviously more sherry now, so we've got no American oak, but I can still pick up some of that slightly industrial spirit character that that I could pick up on the Hielan bottling. But there's obviously more dried fruits. It's really quite juicy. It's chunky. It's a little bit tight. It's very herbal. And I'm getting quite a lot of coffee. I mean, again, there's no blemishes. It's not a bad nose. Like I said, it's a little bit chunky. I'm guessing that the alcohol is probably adding to that kind of feel. See what the passes like. Again, I can pick up a little bit of the distillery character right at the beginning. There's a sort of almost kind of corn-like note. Oh, it's bitter as hell on the finish, it really is. I mean, the sherry really starts to come in and getting sort of, you know, walnut shell, bitter licorice, treacle. It is a chunky one, it has to be said, and, you know, a little inelegant, I would say, and certainly really bitter on the finish, but you know, that brings with it some dark chocolate, some spices, and it's not too bitter. I mean, the alcohol is certainly sort of like emphasising that that bitterness, and we'll put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. It's a bit homogeneous, to be honest with you. The sherry is kind of slinked off, dissipated, should we say. I'm certainly getting more barley character now. It's a bit softer as well. It's not quite as hard, although it's got that edge still to it. Vanilla, still quite herbal, but I've lost a lot of the dried fruit character. I mean, there's still a little bit there, but it's kind of, you know, sort of pass on now. softer, sweeter, less bitter, a lot less bitter. You know, dropping the ABV really has kind of tamed that bitterness. It's maybe not quite as chunky. There is an element of finesse there, I would say. It's got a good length. There's still plenty of sherry on the palate. I'm not getting quite so much of the sort of the distillery character, conversely, like I was getting on the nose. It's still a bit gritty. There's still some chocolatey notes. There's still some spice on the finish, but overall it feels a lot softer. Yeah, I mean, it's not my total cup of tea. It's not an out and out sherry monster, and it has, I think, its plus points and its minus points. Okay, so let's move on to the 18. So now we are in the dark realms. I mean, look at the colour of that. I mean, you know, will there be any distillery character evident? Well, we shall find out. I think maybe because I'm searching for it, I can just get an inkling of it. But to be honest with you, it's all sherry. I mean, it's big, oloroso, herbal, PXy, winey, dried fruits, grape, raisin, green nuts. I mean, it's just all sherry. And I find that with sherry monsters, when you're in this kind of teens age, that's it. You get sherry, and it hasn't quite developed that sort of like oxidative maturity, the slight Armagnac-y character, and it's sort of sitting there. I mean, I don't like the 15. I've never warmed to the I think that's what's it called, the Revival. A lot of people absolutely love it, and it's always left me completely cold. And it's one of these whiskies, the 18. You know, if you love your big sherry monsters without a great deal of distillery character, then fine. For me, you know, it pretty much could come from any Scottish distillery in reality, because it's all the cask. It's clean. There's no sulphur. So let's see what those are. What did I say about there being no sulphur? There is a slight blemish, and that blemish kind of builds up as the sort of like that, as the progression goes. It's green nuts, it's green olives, it's walnuts, it's prunes, but again, it is just sherry, and that blemish, that little, that slight sulphury kind of note, which I don't think it's going to come from the spirit. I mean, yes, you know, I've never tasted new make Glendronach, so I couldn't tell you how sulphury the new make is, but one imagines pretty sulphury. But the Hielan didn't have any sulphury character whatsoever, so one assumes that by 8 years old, it's, you know, the oak has certainly removed enough of the sulphur from the spirit to make it sort of like, you know, drinkable. So therefore one can only conclude that at 18 and you're getting a bit of a sulphur blemish, it's got to be a rogue cask. And, you know, the sherry industry may well go on and on about how they no longer use sulphur candles and things like that. Well then, where does that sulphur note come from? You know, you tell me. If it's not coming from the spirit, it's got to come from the cask. And if they're not using sulphur candles, I mean, you know, I wondered at one point whether it was maybe bacterial taint, but when you think about it, the level of the alcohol should kill off any bacteria that was present in the cask in its, you know, when it was originally sort of shipped over. So I think it's unlikely to be bacterial taint. So it just, you know, when you remove, you know, everything and you're left with one supposition. Anyway, so yeah, probably not the greatest bottling of 18-year-old that I've ever tasted. Okay, so let's move on to the Abbey Whisky 20-year-old. So this is a single PX puncheon. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh yes, that's PX for definite. Really quite complex though. I mean, you get walnuts, prunes, cold tea, orange zest, dried figs, sticky treacle, winey black fruits. I mean, as far as sherry character, I mean, all right, so putting aside one's you know feelings on sherry casks, as far as a sherry monster goes, it's actually pretty well balanced. I like the thread of citrus that is going through that. So that's giving it a little bit of a freshness. It's stopping it becoming overly sweet, overly treacly, yeah, it's, as far as sherry casks go, we're not getting a huge amount of oxidation character, but there's a little bit starting to come in. So you are starting to get secondary and tertiary characteristics from the aging process, which is making it slightly more interesting. A little bit of tar now, plenty of coffee, sort of, you know, quite dark coffee, sort of French coffee. So yeah, as far as the cask goes, or this bottling goes, it's got a relative amount of complexity. Certainly showing more complexity than the 18-year-old. Anyway, let's see what it passes like. Soft, juicy, treacly, a little bit of cinnamon, coriander, again walnuts, prunes, etc., etc. All the sort of characters you would expect, or all the flavours you would expect from a PX cask. Again, it's got quite a pleasant lift to it, and I think that's obviously the alcohol is kind of just emphasising and supporting that sort of citric note that's running through it. It's a little short, but again, that's the alcohol. It's got a pleasant drop of spice. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it. I need to be careful as there's not a huge amount left there. Just see what that does to it. Licorice, get more licorice. It's lifted it as well. It's slightly lighter. There's a slight sort of cognac-y kind of dried fruit note creeping in now, which is the tertiary kind of character that I was looking for earlier on. That's certainly more noticeable now that you put a little drop of water with it. Touch of wood smoke as well. See what it passes like now. Very silky, very smooth, very soft, no distillery character whatsoever. It's not rough, it's juicy, it's mouth-watering. It's less complex now with a drop of water, but it's not so spicy. Again, you know, all the PX character is still there. It's certainly not lessened the impact of that. And yeah, I mean, it's pleasant. It's not something I'm going to get over effusive about, but it's very clean. For those of you that love this kind of stuff, you know, you would die for it. You know, for me, yeah. Right, okay, so let's move up 1 year and move on to the Parliament. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now again, maybe it's because I'm looking for it, I can pick up some herbal, slightly edgy distillery, sort of barley, and I think it's probably because I'm looking for it, and it's sort of, yeah, because again, we're talking dense, chunky, not totally inelegant. It's not four square, but it's certainly not quite of the sort of characteristic of the Abbey whiskey bottling. It's chunky. It's, you know, it's here. It's slightly earthy. There's a bit of spice note. There's a bit of chocolate note. Again, it's no real distillery character. I mean, I think I picked it up right off the bat because I was looking for it, but now it's been in the glass for a little while, I can't pick that distillery note up whatsoever. There's a little bit of orange. I must admit, you know, I mean, you know, I don't know what the Parliament's going for now, but I mean, it's well over 100 and something odd quid, and you know, it's not the one. I mean, if I was shelling out, you know, that kind of level of money, I wouldn't be shelling out on this. Although, again, you know, it's pretty clean. I don't pick up any sulphur notes. I don't pick up any off notes. But we'll wait till we get to that. Moist, juicy, chunky, pleasantly soft. Again, there's that thread of citrus that's sort of running through it, which is just about balancing up the richness of the PX and the wininess and the treacle. It's almost a sort of minerally kind of note on the aftertaste. You know, it's that sort of citric note is kind of like building into it. Bit of wood smoke on the aftertaste, dark chocolate as well. I mean, you know, it's again very clean, no sulphur. You know, it's not totally polished. It's not in the sort of the Dalmore Macallan kind of style, and it does have a bit of an edge to it. And so yeah, it's interesting from that kind of fact. It's not, again, a whiskey that you're going to ever get me going, oh my god, that's incredible, because it is, at the end of the day, pretty much all sherry and no character other than that. But, you know, again, it all boils down to, if you like that type of whiskey, if you like this sort of thing, then you're going to love that. You know, for me, like I said, I would like, I'm down here with the Hielan, I mean, in reality, so I'm saving myself a lot of pennies. Right, and finally we're on to the Malts of Scotland 24-year-old. Let's see what those gives us on this end. Oof. Now that's really crisp, really minerally and citric and almost sharp. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, yes, the alcohol is obviously helping that, and it's kind of emphasising that. It has a lovely cognac-y character. You know, we really are now into the realms of the tertiary characteristics, the maturation character, or oxidation character, I should say. A little bit of marzipan, menthol. Yeah, sort of quite herbally. It becomes quite herbal. Almost kind of heathery, in that sort of Glengarry kind of Hielan manner. It's no distillery character, but it's got quite a lot going on for it. And again, no off notes, no sulphur, so that's pretty good. So we'll pass on. Unctuous, silky, that length is incredible. Again, loads of cognac, sort of like dried fruits, less overt sort of PX-y sort of character, so I'm guessing probably an Oloroso sherry hoggy, quite herbal, again, heathery, really minerally, citric. The alcohol is just absolutely perfectly balanced. It has to be said, for a sherry monster, that is a perfectly balanced sherry monster. It's the sort of sherry monster that, you know, if I'm in the mood for a sherry monster, that's what I'm going to have. You know, again, no distillery character. Wasn't expecting it, but as I said earlier, what you lose at this kind of age with regards to distillery character, you make up for with oxidation character and the sort of cognac-y kind of character that a lot of these type of whiskies display. And that's impressive, it has to be said. It doesn't need any water, in my personal opinion. But I think it would probably make it a little bit. So I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to sort of go, I'll keep that a little bit for later on. But yeah, so that is a very, very impressive bottling, it has to be said. And yeah, good way. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. So yeah, really interesting. It's always fun to delve into the dark side, it has to be said. And you know, like I said, I think if I'm in the mood for a sherry monster, then you know, more often than not, then Glendronach is my kind of go-to. Certainly, I like the Hielan. I mean, it's just my kind of whiskey. It's balanced. You know, I get American oak character, I get distillery character, I get a bit of sherry, and it's all pretty harmonious. And so yeah, I'm a bit of a cheap date at the end of the day. The cask strength, I must admit, I wasn't hugely enamoured by that. It was a bit chunky, it was a bit foursquare, it was a bit inelegant. Yeah, a little drop of water sort of made it softer, but you know, it was just sort of like, yeah, I can take it or leave it, to be honest with you. The 18-year-old, again, it's the teens, and I often have issues or struggle with the teens that feature an awful lot of sherry, because it's just sherry, you know, and it hasn't quite got into the realms of the 20-somethings where you're getting the tertiary characters, and so therefore it is just a big, fairly brutal sherry monster. And yeah, the Abbey whiskey bottling, the 20-year-old. I mean, again, you know, more intriguing, more complex. We're starting to see that sort of like oxidation character starting to come through, and yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, quite an interesting bottling. The 21-year-old, again, kind of sort of carried on the theme, although it did have a sort of like an overt sort of, you know, chunkiness, and one could say slightly inelegant kind of character. But again, you know, it's, do you like that? And you're starting to see, like I said, the sort of like, you know, the oxidation character coming in. So we are now getting a little bit more complexity from that. And certainly I think the standout bottling of this afternoon was the Malts of Scotland bottling. I mean, that is, you know, if I'm going to go for an overt sherry monster, then that's what I'm going to go for. It had balance. It didn't have any distillery character. Wasn't expecting any at the end of the day, but that the theme of the citric note kind of like does follow through all of these kind of bottlings, and certainly at cask strength it kind of emphasises that citricness and Hielan minerality, which was quite a surprise. So, you know, again, really quite balanced in essence, and yeah, yeah, I could drink that quite happily, but you know, you probably can't find it now because it's, yeah, well, anyway. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I hope too many people don't go, ooh, thumbs down, because, you know, I think it, like I said, it's not a style of whiskey that I absolutely love, but, you know, I think I would like to think I've been sort of quite fair and quite balanced in my appraisal of these samples, and, you know, hopefully you guys will agree with that. So So yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Until next time, good afternoon and good dramming. Oh no, yes it is afternoon. Oh, good afternoon.
Я в тобі бачу своє відображення, своє відображення, своє відображення.
Твоє відображення.